In this video, I will describe when and why grip and wrist strength are important for test cutting. Grip and wrist strength are of course important for fencing in general, however, the focus for this video will be on the implications for test cutting. I will also offer a couple of suggestions on how to train grip and wrist strength. Following those suggestions, we will end up training more than just the grip and the wrist, but also other strength and endurance relevant for fencing in general. When test cutting, your technique is what matters most. However, in some contexts, your wrist and grip strength can become limiting factors. It doesn't matter if the power generation in your cut is perfect if you can't actually transfer that power to the cutting medium. The weakest link in the chain from your body to the cutting medium are likely to be your grip and your wrist. If the cutting medium is soft, like for example water bottles, milk cartons, or pool noodles, it's very unlikely that your grip and wrist strength will be the limiting factors of your test cutting performance. However, with a more resistant cutting medium, like clay or tatami, especially if it's multiple mats or mats covered in fabric, then the effects of insufficient grip and wrist strength can become more noticeable. The effects will be even more pronounced when cutting one-handed, as all of the stabilization will have to be done with one hand instead of two. Within HEMA, test cutting with a longsword is by far the most common. If you've only ever cut two-handed, you are almost certainly underestimating just how much of a difference having only one hand on the handle makes. On the other hand, the second hand offers new and exciting ways to mess up the coordination and thus the cutting trajectory and edge alignment. But that is a topic for another day. I will now describe two failure modes in cutting where insufficient grip and/or wrist strength are likely culprits. Running out of sword. The less aligned with your forearm the sword is, the shorter your reach is. The alignment between the lower arm and the blade is primarily determined by which grip you use. There are many ways to cut, but I'm going to assume you're using some variation of the handshake grip. When the cutting medium is resisting your cut, it will try to push your grip and wrist position back toward a hammer grip. The hammer grip is less aligned with your lower arm and thus has a shorter reach. If your strength is insufficient to resist this pushback throughout the cut, you may end up shortening your reach to the point that your sword leaves the target without cutting all the way through. This is the failure mode that is usually called running out of sword. As an illustration, here is an attempt to very slowly cut through a tire with a blunt sparring messer. I think we can all agree that success is unlikely. When the blade encounters resistance it can't cut through, when the cutting motion continues, this shortens the reach and the blade is dragged across the surface of the target instead of cutting through it. Please note that not all cases of running out of sword are caused by insufficient grip and wrist strength. For example, you might simply be too far away from the target, or have failed to complete the extension before reaching the target. Second failure mode. Curving toward vertical. In a roll of the tatami, not all directions through the cutting medium are the same. As the mat is made of straw, it is easier for the blade to move along the straw than cut across them. If the wrist strength isn't enough to keep the blade moving along the intended trajectory, then the cut may take the path of least resistance by curving toward vertical, so the blade is moving along the straw rather than cutting across them. For descending cuts, this will be curving vertically down, and for ascending cuts, this will be curving vertically up. This failure mode is extra annoying as it tends to ruin a large piece of the mat, at least for descending cuts. This failure mode may also cause you to exit the mat at a different location and at a different angle than you expected. This is one of the reasons why you are advised against cutting down toward the lead leg. Now on to training grip and wrist strength. There are specialized exercises for grip and wrist strength. Each one targets a specific way the wrist or grip can move. Specificity in training is very good, but there is a problem. It can be really boring. If something is boring, it is more difficult to keep up consistently over time. The best training session is the one that actually happens. I will now suggest 3 different training tools that at least I enjoy more than the highly specific exercises. Following these suggestions, we will also end up training other fencing-relevant strength and endurance. Kettlebells. Most of you will already be familiar with kettlebells. Pretty much everything you do with a kettlebell will train your grip and wrist to some degree. You're swinging around a big lump of metal. Better hold on to it if you want to avoid making holes in your walls and floor. If you want to get an extra challenge for the grip and wrist, go for the hammer grip or bottom-up variations of kettlebell exercises. If the kettlebell is heavy enough, simply holding or carrying it will be a challenge for the grip, especially if you're using something to make the grip wider, like fat grips. I'm not going to give instructions on how to do specific kettlebell exercises. There is already plenty of good content for that, for example on Mark Wildman's channel. There's a link to his kettlebell playlist in the description. Next up is Indian clubs. What is known in the West as Indian clubs are light wooden clubs, maximum 3 kilos and usually less than that. Calling them Indian clubs is a bit misleading though. 1. Not all club swinging traditions are Indian. 2. The club swinging traditions that are Indian include way more than just light clubs. Anyway, I will not attempt to disentangle this further here and will refer to light clubs as Indian clubs. Indian clubs are typically used in pairs. Being light, they don't require as much warm-up. In fact, they could be your warm-up. Light also means you can go up in speed and complexity. The low weight also means that it's possible to isolate the movement to just the arms, keeping the body as still as possible. I've been using Heroic Sports Palavandel club handles. Not as pretty as the traditional wooden clubs, but more flexible and less expensive. You can approach learning how to swing clubs the HEMA way, so to speak. That is, to learn from old written sources. For example, Lamar's 1889 manual is available for free online. There's a link to that in the description. In the description, there are also links to channels that go through Lamar's club swinging exercises. If we make the clubs of metal instead, they will unsurprisingly become heavier. What we now have is a clubbell, also known as a heavy club. Clubbells can be used one-handed or two-handed. The standard advice is to learn the two-handed version of an exercise first, and then later move on to the single-hand version. There is some overlap with the light clubs, but with a heavy enough club, you must engage more of the body. In general, exercises are slower and less complex than for light clubs. Clubbells can also be used in pairs, although that's a little bit more rare. For learning clubbell exercises, there's a link to Mark Wildman's playlist in the description. In summary, yes, technique is more important than strength for test cutting. Being less important doesn't make strength irrelevant, though. Especially when the cutting medium is a bit tougher and you are cutting one-handed. There's nothing that says you're only allowed to train technique or only allowed to train strength. Do both. One last thing. Fencing is a highly asymmetric activity. Supplementary training can help work against the imbalances fencing exclusively would otherwise create.